Well, welcome everyone. This is another interview that we're conducting today, and I'm excited to be joined today by Dr. Naj Sumru. Hello, Naj.
Hi, Anthony.
Naj and I have been collaborating for a while. Naj runs the YouTube channel Outback Doctor, and I'm sure I know he's going to tell you a little bit more about himself shortly, but we're conducting this interview with Naj because Naj has also had one of those journeys through the system, trying to crack the doctor job market here in Australia, and has also been successful recently. And I now think about 4 months in now, your first job, is that right?
Yeah, correct.
So Naj has a lot of learnings for all of you guys, and I'm really excited about this interview because there's kind of a lot of key lessons here. And without stealing Naj's thunder, I think these are kind of vital lessons if you are really aiming to get a job as a doctor here in Australia, particularly if you're coming through what's called the standard pathway process. So we're going to just conduct, this is an interview format. We're going to have some slides. I'm going to interview Naj. He's going to take you through those 10 key lessons, and we're going to get right into it. So the way this is going to work is, as I said, it's going to be an interview format, and Naj has got 10 key lessons to talk to us about. And we'd encourage you to watch through to the end, because it's important to get every key lesson here. And then at the end, we're going to talk to you about how you might be able to get some further help in your aim of becoming a doctor here in Australia. Before we get into that, we should obviously do a bit of a disclaimer. I think both Naj and I try and give the very best advice we can in the YouTube channels and the other sort of formats, the websites and others, and the Facebook groups that we run. But it is important to understand that this is general advice, and there's personal views here, and we would strongly encourage you, and we'll talk about this at the end, to get some individual independent advice as well around your particular situation, because this is a very complex beast, and individual circumstances may vary. You wanted to say a few things as well, Naj, so over to you.
Yeah. So essentially, before we start off, for those of you who know me well, those of you who are joining in, I'll introduce myself a little bit later on during the video. But just before I start, wanted to make sure that when I refer to AMC, it's Australian Medical Council. APRA basically means Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Authority. The views we are going to say are our personal views, and I'll take you through my journey, which I have to understand that I am an IMG like you. So going through the system was a bit of a challenge, but obviously I was able to navigate through the standard pathway. So today we are going to run you through the standard pathway. If you're coming through the competent pathway, then obviously that is going to be another thing that you have to think about. This video is particularly focusing on hospital jobs. So if you are tending to go into the GP world, then this may not be the most ideal video for you. AMC 1 refers to AMC MCQ, and AMC 2 would be AMC Clinical.
Yeah, well, we'll drop some links in our descriptions for this video below to sort of direct some of the people to some of the other videos we've done around different pathways. There are some lessons here for anyone. There's some general lessons, but as Naj says, this is particularly tuned into those coming through the standard pathway. Now, you've got this concept of the cog here. Naj, tell us a little bit about the wheels of the cog.
Yeah, so essentially getting into the system is like a complex machine where you need to rotate a few cogs to work the whole machinery through. Now, before you get into the system, the general concept out there is that you do AMC 1, you do AMC 2, and you will get a job, and you'll get. Obviously, that's not how it works. On surface, it does look like that, but there are a lot more cogs to the pathway. So during this slideshow, I am going to take you through all of them one by one, step by step.
So one of the things I talk about a lot is, I get asked this question a lot, and I'm sure you do, Naj. How easy is it, or how difficult is it to get a job in Australia as a doctor? And I guess the problem is not. There's some information out there, but there's not complete, concrete information. Again, it's difficult to know because everyone's circumstances is different. What I end up saying is it is difficult, but it is possible. But whilst there's this headline figure of there being an oversupply of junior doctors, it is a bit nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think it's much more complicated than we think it is. So essentially, there are things out there that Australia has a shortage of doctors and they need doctors, which is true, but not at the junior doctor level, because essentially when you're coming through the standard pathway, you the first year has to be supervised. And to be supervised, you need a supervisor who is a senior doctor. Now, there is a shortage in Australia in the senior doctor category, people who are consultants and at that level. And because of that shortage, it affects the junior doctors who are coming in. So a consultant can only supervise X number of doctors, very limited number of international doctors. Therefore, if you are coming through the standard pathway, it makes life challenging because you not only need to secure a job, but that hospital needs to make sure that they have a consultant who's also willing to supervise you. And therefore, the competition becomes really high. And to put a number to the figure, it's very challenging. But in my opinion, I'd say for every job, or if all the applicants apply, there's only a 10% chance of success.
Yeah.
In the first 6 months.
Yeah, there's literally thousands of doctors in Australia going through the AMC process. Kind of know this by the number of people sitting the exams. And anecdotally, the number of positions that come up that would be suitable for someone on the AMC pathway, the standard pathway, maybe 100 in a year. It's sort of a bit hard to gauge. But so, yes, it's probably a 1 in 10 chance, but persistence can be your friend there as well.
Absolutely.
So tell us about the pathway, Naj.
Yeah, well, there are basically 3 pathways are coming into Australia. So one is the standard pathway, which is on the slide that you can see. The other one is the competent pathway, just for those people who have graduated from UK, US, Canada, or countries that are comparable. And the third pathway is the specialist pathway. So this standard pathway, I also deem it as the non-competent pathway because this is one of the most challenging pathways to get into. Essentially, this is a slide I picked up from the APRA's website. So there are 2 ways of working in Australia. Either you do your AMC MCQ, which is AMC 1, and secure a job offer, get on a limited registration and continue to work for a year and then do your AMC 2. Or you do your AMC 2 and then secure a job. Either or, holding your hair like this or like this, you can pretty much work after AMC 1. So what I recommend to doctors, international doctors, is that make sure that you start applying for jobs after AMC 1. Because essentially, even after AMC 2, you're pretty much at the same level. You'll be paid the same. Your working hours would be the same. Your level would be the same. So do not waste your time. It's not a waste of time, but do not consume your time in just focusing on AMC2 and not applying for jobs.
Yeah. So we interviewed Dr. Path recently, and or did a few months ago, but I released that recently, and he actually made the option to concentrate on the AMC Part 2. But he said in his video he kind of did that for a reason, but he wished really that he'd started applying after the Part 1 because there is a bit of a gap. And the thing for Path was that he actually ended up having to go back to India to get some recency of practice prior to actually getting the job. So, yeah, I think he would back that contention up as well.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that as we go through in the slides, why I say that.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the secret sauce. You've got a secret sauce here, Naj. Tell us about the secret sauce.
Yeah, I guess to eat any good curry, you need to have a sauce that, works out and gives you the best flavor. And similar is the case of getting into the hospital jobs. You guys would remember that I was talking about the cog wheel, and there are other cogs to the wheel. And these are the ones that I basically emphasize on. So essentially, you work on your AMC 2, AMC 1, but you also need to have a permanent residency. Permanent residency plays a critical role in getting you in the system because the reason why that's important is that the hospitals don't have to sponsor you, and sponsorship can take a long period of time. The other things of importance are the recency of practice. We are going to talk about that, and that's why I was saying that if you're fresh, if you've done AMC 1, make sure you start applying for jobs. Application, the way you put in your application, you can be the best doctor in the world, but if your application and your interview isn't good, then you would not get the job. So experience plays a essential role in Australia. So if you're a fresh graduate as compared to somebody who has got a couple of years of experience under the belt, you are more likely to get selected if you have the experience.
Yeah. So we'll come back to some of these elements, but one thing I wanted to focus in on with that particular slide is the permanent residency. So not only is it useful for you to have your permanent residency from an employer's point of view and not having to sponsor you for a visa, the other thing that I talk to people about is that in Australia, the legal situation is that jobs have to go to Australian citizens or permanent residents first. So by having your permanent residency, you can dramatically lift yourself in terms of your candidacy, because basically if you're eligible for a job and there's 10 other people going for it and you're the only one with permanent residency, then they will give you the job. That's just basically the law. So it can really boost chances as well. And the problem there is you don't get your permanent residency overnight, do you, Nudge? There's a process to that. You usually have to start on a visa of some sort and graduate yourself up to that.
Yeah, generally a student visa, as I did it in my case. But I guess that's a video in itself, how to get a permanent residency without the AMC. We can work on that.
Yeah, I think you've done a video on that, but we should probably try and do another video, because that's a really common question I get about what's this.
Yeah. So essentially, make sure we'll put the link in for the video that I've done on get the alternate pathways of getting a permanent residency in Australia. So make sure you watch that. But we'll also there's some updates in the immigration system this year, so maybe we should do an update on that as well.
Yeah, it changes constantly, so anything you watch that's more than a year old, it's probably useful, but make sure you get an update on it as well. Yeah, but let's not do visas, because that could take us a whole hour just of itself. So tell us a little bit about you, Naj, because it's always important to get the context and find out, from the person who's been through it, so that people can kind of say, well, yeah, they've done it and they understand it. You've had quite a long journey.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important to shed a light on that. But I think the most important thing is that I am an IMG like you. So if you are watching this video, you're pretty much going to cover the journey that I've covered throughout the years in Australia. So I came to Australia about 10 years ago. And initially did my master's in public health, which I've made a video on that. I'll put it in the description why you should not be doing that degree. But then I did a PhD in sports medicine, and then essentially took a track of working as a researcher / lecturer in the universities, and that's how I got my permanent residency. In 2016, I decided that I'm going to embark on the clinical journey and get my clinical license. So I started working on the AMC, passed that in 2017. Took me another 14 months to get my job. So in total, it took me 3 years from the time I decided that I'm going to embark on the AMC to the time I landed up a job.
And that seems to be quite common these days. It's about a 2 to 3 year kind of length from making that decision to go for the AMC and then starting in the job. And it can be a parallel process, but it's quite linear at times. But that's kind of what I'm hearing. So again, if you're sort of wondering how long does it take, and how I'm kind of thinking, well, how long will I give myself? It's around about 3 years. Sometimes more for some people, and that again can become critical when we come back to the whole recency of practice.
I totally agree with you. And the reason why it took me 3 years is that I had zero guidance. So if I was to go back again and maybe start the whole process, it would take me a fraction of that time, because once you learn the system and you understand what you need to do and how you need to navigate it, obviously you can do it in a shorter period of time. But essentially, as you said, it's the process itself is it's not very transparent. So you have to do it by trial and error.
Absolutely. The first lesson you have for us, Naj, is understanding the language and the terminology of the system. So take us a little bit through that.
Yeah, that's really the most important thing. Obviously, when you're applying for jobs, you have to understand that what you're applying for. If you don't understand that, then you'll keep on applying for positions which are not suited to you or related to you. So in Australia, the way it works is that after you graduate, like you finish your final year of medicine, you get into a position called the PGY 1 year or the intern year. And I'll talk about that a bit more in detail, because intern jobs, and Anthony, you can also shed some light on that later on, is that intern jobs are really difficult to get, almost I'd say impossible to get. So don't apply for those positions. But then I think
the description of this video is going to have about 100 other videos linked to it. But I've done a video about the internship thing, and we'll put a link down about how to identify jobs by their titles, and as well as looking through the selection criteria, because that's critical. But yeah, so the intern's very tricky. It's possible, but it's not probable.
Yeah.
You got to tell us about the PGY2.
PGY2 and PGY3 years, which are also called the RMOs, resident medical officers. In some states, they are also called HMOs, hospital medical officers.
Yeah.
In other states, they can be called medical officers. So, it just varies from, or JHOs as well, junior medical.
Queensland's got junior health hospital officers.
Hospital officers. So, it sort of varies from state to state. But yeah, if you see somewhere in the job description as PGY2 or PGY3, those are the jobs you'll get. So make sure you apply for only those jobs, and rather than going here and there and getting into unaccredited trainee or PGY4 jobs, difficult to get those jobs.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes to be fair, the people that advertise these jobs, sometimes it's not their area of expertise, and they're less than clear in the position description or the selection criteria. So, if you are unclear, you can sometimes ask, but there are a few key factors that tend to give it away. Usually there's some indication to how many years experience you need or what sort of level you'll be functioning at. And you can sort of cut down your application load quite a bit by looking for selection criteria that indicate that they will accept someone who hasn't got their registration yet. But it can be tricky. So the other thing to do is contact them, but sometimes you don't get a response, do you? No.
Yeah, that's often the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. So understanding the hoops, and that's really important. And in terms of the hoops, I think we sort of touched upon a couple of things. Number one was the permanent residency. If you don't have the permanent residency, that's going to be your biggest hurdle in getting the job in Australian market. So, I guess you have to work through that. I guess I haven't listened to Part's story, but one of the hurdles for international doctors is that they have to do the AMC2 to make themselves look a little bit above the normal crowd. And once they've done that, then it increases the likelihood of getting it sponsored. So those are the things. So if you go forward a little bit in the slide, I may have put in a couple of pointers over there.
Well, we'll do that. Yes, but I think, again, the point there, there are two things. There's a number of things that can make you stand out from the masses, if you like. One is if you have your residency. Now, again, if you've only been here a little while, you probably don't have your residency. So Path is on a visa, but the thing he had was his Part 2, so he had his full IMC certificate, so that's going to stand out. Another thing is often if you've done well in your English language test, like above the average, that can sometimes stand out on a CV. So you need to kind of try and have a point of difference around some of these things. You don't have to have all of them, but bear in mind that there's going to be a number of people who just have the AMC Part 1. So if you just have the AMC Part 1, then you're not going to stand out.
So the way the hoops work over here are firstly is going to be the AMC exams, either you've done Part 1 or Part 2. Then you need to secure a job offer first. So if you don't have the job offer, you can't apply to Opera and get your equivalency. So essentially, you need to score a job offer first. You get that, and then you apply to Opera. And depending on the job position you have got, Opera is going to deem you whether you satisfy that criteria and you get the registration, or they put you at a lower registration. But that is again important when you're applying for jobs. You may get a job at a higher level, let's say PGY4 plus, but Opera may deem you ineligible for that, and then they can reduce your supervision level. So that's also very important. So apply for the most junior, most sort of positions, because that Opera is more likely to give you a registration for that. Let's move on to lesson 3. And which, in my opinion, if you have the permanent residency, then you should not fall into the AMC clinical trap. And when I say that, I don't mean to say that you don't have to do the AMC2. What I'm trying to say is that you can work without the AMC2 in Australia. PR obviously is the important factor. And once you have got into the Australian system, there are actually 10 hospitals which the AMC has accredited to give you an exemption from AMC2. So if you get into one of those hospitals, obviously the first job in those hospitals would be difficult. But if you get your first job in an XYZ hospital, and then you transfer to those hospitals, let's say working 6 months or 1 year down the track, then you can get an exemption. And those positions are called the work-based assessment.
Yeah, so here's the AMC website for you. And so you can go here. This is the website that you will probably be familiar with once you sort of engage in this process anyway. And you can see that this is the kind of process for going through the 2 exams. But as Naj is saying there, you can see also that if you're able to get a job at any of these hospitals, then, and there's pretty much one in most states, and not every territory. ACT and Northern Territory aren't represented here, but I think there's one in every state of Australia. And then there's an opportunity to go through this workplace-based assessment program. And most people who get into this program do get through, probably for a couple of reasons. One is that the hospitals are only going to select people that they think are, at a high level. And so the selection process is kind of guaranteeing someone who's probably going to pass through this program. And the other good thing about the workplace-based assessment program is it's continuous feedback. So if you aren't up to standard in a certain area, you'll get that straight away, and then there's an opportunity to improve. Whereas with the clinical, you just have to keep coming back and sitting that clinical. So, and you do get some feedback around the clinical, but it's not as good as the workplace-based assessment program. And that raises another question. A common question I have is people say, "Oh, how many times can I sit the AMC exams?" They seem to be happy to take your money. There's no limit to how many times you sit either of the exams. There's usually there has in the past been a waiting list for the clinical, but yeah, you can keep sitting as many times as you like.
And on top of that, I must add that there's no expiry either, so you can do your exam and it just it
remains current. Yeah, that's true as well. So if you've got your part 1, that stays current forever. And so that means you don't have to, you don't, like, if you fail the clinical 3 times, they don't make you go back to the part 1. You just have to keep sitting the clinical. But the clinicals, the pass rate for the part 1's about a bit under 60%. The clinicals are close to 25%. So it's a really tough exam as well. So we come back to this idea of the secret sauce, Naj.
Yeah, so we've spoken about a couple of things over here. I think we've touched really comprehensively upon the importance of PR. But then there are other factors such as recency of practice, application, interview, and experience. So let's move on to them and talk a little bit more about them.
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, so this is the most important thing, recency of practice. So no matter how well you've done in your AMC 1, AMC 2 English exam, you will not get a job in Australia if you do not have the recency of practice. And Opera's website clearly states that. We'll try to put a link in the description as well, that essentially you need at least 4 weeks of clinical work in the last 12 months to qualify. If you don't have that, then it needs to be at least 3 months of work in the last 3 years. So if you've got that amount of paid clinical work, and it can be in any position, it can be as a GP, it can be in the hospital, or it can be in a different private practice. As long as you've got that, then Opera would be able to sign you off and say that you've got the recency of practice. It's really important that you have that before applying for jobs, because most of the times when you apply for jobs, and this is a mistake I was making, is that I used to apply without the recency of practice. And the first thing the employers will look at is the recency of practice. If you don't have that, they will not read your application and it'll be thrown in the bin.
Yeah. And bear in mind, this is a minimum standard across doctors and other professions, in fact. So it's also about, say, doctors who've had a break. Often doctors go on a break for, like, to have children and things like that. So if they're a specialist or anything like that. So it is a minimum standard. And it basically, if you do struggle with that recency of practice, there's a process, if you're generally registered or specially registered, where you can come back still, but with some oversight until they're comfortable. So again, with the jobs that international medical graduates are doing through the standard pathway, there is a level of oversight and supervision to counter your familiarity both with the Australian system or just your recency of clinical practice. I think the key thing is, obviously you have to meet that minimum, but from an employer perspective, they will also start to worry if it's been more than 2 years, definitely 3 years since you've done any work. So often when people come to me and say, well, I'm struggling, I've had a couple of interviews, but I put in lots of applications and I'm not going anywhere, and I look at their CV and it's been 3 years since they've worked, and I say, look, I really strongly suggest you go, if you can, go back to your own country and do at least 3 months, if not a bit longer. That's going to be a key thing that helps improve your candidacy. So again, don't fall for the trap of the minimum of what APRA says. That's just for registration. Think about what the employers thinking about here as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the more the merrier. But in my case, because I was working full time in Australia, I couldn't afford to go more than 1 month. So what I would do is that whenever I got my holidays, I'd go back for a month, work over there, come back, and that sort of worked for me. But the other thing is that I was working at the junior level, so I'm PGY2, and that they sort of are a little bit more lenient at that.
Then there's the application process.
Well, very important. So to know where you're going to apply, how you're going to apply, and what you're going to apply for. So we've already spoken about the positions or the levels you're going to apply, the RMO positions, PGY2 sort of area. The thing that I've sort of learned through my experience is that the RMO campaigns are not very productive. They take up a lot of your time, but I haven't seen a lot of people scoring jobs in that. So if you can apply for them, it's a good practice because that helps you develop a selection criteria and write up all the questions. But the chance of getting a job through the RMO campaign is quite low. Remember, the reason is that all the Australian graduates actually also apply through the RMO campaigns. And you're sort of competing with people who already have upper registration, who already have work experience in Australia or have done their intern here. And also you're competing against people who have got competent registration or competent pathway entry. And that sort of makes it very challenging. So that's one. So if you have time, apply for that. If you don't have time, don't worry about it. Secondly, references. Make sure you've got Australian references. If you don't work in Australia, then make sure you've got references who are currently working, have currently supervised you, or are at a consultant level. Really important. Make sure you put them in your CV. The third important thing is if you are in Australia or you have time to come down to Australia, make sure you do an observership at a hospital, because that helps you in two ways. Number one, it orients you to the system, but also you develop contacts. And with the context, you can develop referees who are local Australian doctors.
References, yeah, I agree with you there, Naj. If you can get some senior doctors, or you're going to talk about observerships, but sometimes even things like nursing managers or even registrars, anyone who's kind of working in the Australian context is better than your referees from overseas.
Totally agree, and that makes a difference. Now, moving ahead from there, the areas which you are most likely to find a job, the first job is emergency medicine, or the ED as they say it over here. The reason being that there's a constant shift work involved in ED, and quite a few of the local doctors don't really like working there for a long period of time. So there's always vacancies in the EDs, and EDs are really busy. So the hospitals do want them to an extra doctor or two always over there to help out. So ED positions are really important. So make sure you apply. If you don't have an ED angle, make sure you put a little bit of an ED angle and sort of work through from there. Then essentially the other tip I would like to give you, and that's through my own experience, is that you're more likely to get a job at the end of the year. And end of the year, the reason being this is that a lot of doctors at the end of the year decide to take up a specialty program for the next year, and they've applied for a position and they want to take a bit of a break, enjoy their time. So they'll sometimes resign a little bit early, let's say November, December, and that's where a few vacancies come up. And if you're in the right position at the right place at the right time, then you'll get a job. And that's how I ended up getting a job.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, from my perspective, there's always been a couple of peak times when it's good for IMGs to apply, to explain that the whole system's geared around the medical graduates coming out of the Australian medical school system and the people already with general registration and training. So there's this big period which starts around about now in Australia around May, June, goes all the way through to September, which is called the annual medical recruitment. So a lot of the people involved in recruiting people are already doing and focused on that. So they're not really, haven't got a lot of attention to look at international doctors, and also usually most of the jobs are filled. Once they've finished doing all that, that's when a lot of gaps emerge around October, November. Getting too close to Christmas, they usually push through at that point because they're coming through to the start of the year where all the medical graduates start as interns. There's sometimes a bit of a period also around about April, May, where people might have dropped out and they haven't quite got into annual medical recruitment, where you might see a few jobs being advertised. And the reason being there is that they know they've got a whole year almost to fill. So, so it's about April, May, and then October, November are kind of the the two good times to look. Yeah. Actually making yourself presentable to the employers. And I think this is important. I used to see quite a few people, because I used to be on these blind copy lists where people would just randomly email me about their interest in a job at my hospital with no tailoring, so they went straight into the trash. Yeah, you really do need to know how to present yourself in a format that's going to at least get some attention from the employer, don't you?
Absolutely. So there's been a lot of research that employers on average spend like 5 to 6 or 7 seconds on a CV. And essentially, like from what I know, I was speaking to one of the hospitals in Sydney, and they said that for every position, they get an average of 40 applicants, and they just don't have the time to read through everything. So if your CV sort of doesn't stand out, number one, doesn't have the right things written on it, don't have the proper cover letter, you're more likely to get and end up in trash can.
Yeah. And again, I've done a number of videos about the cover letter or email and the CV, the resume, what stands out. You can see an example there on this PowerPoint slide of the type of Australian CV that I recommend. There's a few other things that you would want to add in as an international medical graduate to make sure that you get through what's called the initial cull. We'll talk about that towards the end in terms of how you can get some help around that, but we'll put some links in the description below for that as well. But let's move on to lesson 7.
Brilliant. So this is the most important lesson, and this is a lesson which not many people tell you about. This lesson is doing the legwork. And when I say legwork, it's important that you follow up your application. So whether you have to give them a ring after applying, whether you have to re-email them, or whether you have to go to the hospital, make sure you do that. The reason why this is important is that it shows that you are really interested in the job. You are genuinely the one. If you get the job, you are going to go over there and work over there. A lot of people apply all over Australia, and then they drop out on jobs. Number 2, it puts a face or a voice to your CV, and employers like that, because they like that this person has the passion and the desperation and the commitment and the motivation to come and work for us. Then let's give him a chance rather than somebody who sent us one email.
Doesn't beat doing that sort of stuff. And in fact, tip I would have is, I see this a lot, and I think you talk about this too, Naj. When you're going through the AMC process, you can kind of get into this bubble with other IMGs where you're, studying with them and getting feedback from them. And it can get a little bit dismal because people start to reflect on their frustrations with the system. You need to step outside that and find any opportunity to meet with actual doctors who are already working the system. So maybe if you can afford it or whatever, go to some of the conferences where doctors are, do some networking. You might get some leads there around observerships or knowing about jobs coming up. And that can really be, again, helpful and can be an efficient way of kind of doing the rounds. But then try and get outside the big cities if you can and look at some of the regional and rural centres. That's where the jobs tend to come up. Naj is a great example of that. You're in a regional centre, aren't you, in Victoria? So, it's an obvious thing, but the jobs tend to fill out from the middles of the capital centres, or they fill in in the middle of the capital centres, and doctors kind of get recruited in when there are vacancies. So, sometimes you might be lucky and score a job at the Royal or the Saint, but that's pretty unlikely. You're more likely you're going to get a city on the fringes of hospital on the fringes of the capital city, or in a regional area, or even a rural area.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you can do to network and span out is go to career events. So you can either go to a conference of your liking. For example, you're into EDs, you go to an emergency medicine conference. But one good place to go in Australia is Australian Medical Association Career Expo. So they run it multiple times in different capital cities. I recently made a video on the AMC Expo in Melbourne. So if you can just look up AMA events, and if you can get into the AMA events, all the hospitals come over there, and it's a great career expo, and you can essentially network with all the HMO managers over there, and that's really good.
So hopefully all of this has gotten you to an interview, but the interview is the kind of clincher, isn't it? So what are your tips around the interview, Naj?
Look, Anthony, I think you, in your videos, you cover in interviews really well, how to go about them. So if anybody has not watched those videos, I would highly recommend watching those videos. But yeah, these are the things that seal the deal for you. So as I say, you can be a really good doctor, but if you stumble, stutter, are not able to perform well on the interview, there is a high likelihood that you will not get the job. Now, a couple of tips that I can give you from my experience. I applied for 47 jobs before I got my first job. I got total of 5 interviews. What the mistakes I made in those interviews is that 4 of them, I gave them on the phone or video conference. So when you give an interview on the phone, the problem comes in is that you're not able to express yourself. They're not able to see you, and you're not able to interact in person with the interviewers, and that puts that's a bit of a negative. So if you have to spend those $500 to get to somewhere in Australia, make sure you spend those $500, because that is the thing that will seal the deal for you. So a lot of hospitals will tell you a Skype interview or a call. Just let them know that, oh, you are already in that city, even if you're not. And they say that you'd be very keen to come down there in person, and just go there and they'll show initiative.
Yeah, I think wherever possible, do it face to face. And I've done a heap of videos about this, and I would also suggest getting some coaching. I think that can really accelerate your performance and lift you above the pack. Now, that can be a little bit difficult because you don't know when you're going to get an interview. So I would suggest think about doing that proactively. Just get a few sessions with someone like myself who's an expert in this area, so you can go through some of the common questions and way the questions are asked and what the panel's looking for, and doing some practice. And then I guess thinking about regularly just practicing that, so when an interview comes up, you're not just madly running around practicing for it, because often you only get a few days notice, don't you?
Yeah. Generally, on average, you'd get at max a week.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of time to prepare yourself at that point. So it's important to treat this as a performance a bit like the IMG clinical exam. You've got to be ready for it and prepared for it. Who's the best person to contact when you're looking for jobs, Naj, in your opinion?
Yeah, so in hospitals, the main point of contact for the workforce is the medical workforce manager. So if you just Google medical workforce manager and put the hospital's name, generally you'll get a name or the contact details. And most of the times when they advertise jobs, then you'd see their email address or their contact number. So make sure before applying, the way I used to work is give them a call and ask them a couple of questions. In general, my questions used to be around the realms of when is the job going to start, what is the expected start date, how many, just ask some technical details, what sort of rotations does it involve, how big is the hospital, those sort of things. The reason why I used to call them is just to gauge their response and see how they would respond back to me, and also sort of reiterating that my name is Naj. So when I email them, they remember me and they at least look at my CV, not send it to the trash. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is if you can find mutual friends, mutual contacts, professional connections with ED directors. They are a great resource. They always are in need of doctors. If they can put a good word in for you or forward your CV, or if you interact with them in let's say a conference or somewhere, then that's a really good way of getting a job. I know multiple people getting jobs by going and meeting up with ED directors, and then they were recommending them. So yeah, those would be the main two mainstays of getting your first job in Australia.
Yeah, and again, that's going to take a bit of time. You're not going to get through the first or second time often. You might be trying to get through email barriers, ringing. Sometimes you get a response, sometimes you don't. You just got to kind of persist with this and give it a bit of time. Again, I would suggest thinking about the regional and rural places more than the big city hospitals, because those hospitals are looking for doctors more and are going to be a bit more receptive. But making those personal connections is important. As Naj says, you'll sometimes get an early lead in when a job's available that you wouldn't necessarily do if you hadn't made that contact.
Yeah. And one good story that I share with quite a few of my friends is DMS. So DMS is Director of Medical Services. He's the big fish or the king in the hospital. So I had one of my friends who knew one of the DMSs that he was interested in playing golf. So he made sure that he joined in the same golf club, took the membership, started playing golf, made some good friends with him, and then over a period of time that DMS was able to recommend him in getting that job. So that's an alternative way of doing it.
Yeah, so as we've said, we'll post some links to some videos and blog posts about how you can kind of help yourself with this process. But if you're wanting to get some sort of one-on-one assistance with someone who's literally gone through the process and learned all the lessons that you need to learn, and can sort of guide you. You can book some standard pathway coaching with Naj. And there'll be a link in the video, our video descriptions for this about how you can do that. And it just might be helpful. I mean, I find, I don't know about you, Naj, but I find often people just want to book in one session with me to go over a few things and have things better explained, and that helps them. And then sometimes like a year or two later, they come back better prepared and all that sort of stuff, and then we're doing interview coaching or going through their CV in a bit more depth, that sort of thing. But even if you're kind of maybe sitting on the fence, maybe you're in India or Pakistan or somewhere like that, thinking, I'm thinking about Australia. You're not quite sure whether it's right for you. Have you got the time to invest in it, etc. You might want to just do a session with Naj to go through those questions, and maybe that'll save you a whole bunch of time going through the process because you decide, well, it's not for me, or maybe it'll give you the confidence that you need to go through it. So often it's helpful to get some of that advice early on, I think. Anything you wanted to say about your coaching, Naj, how it works, what sort of things you focus on?
Yeah, so I think, as we said, every case is different. So if you can get some tailored advice based on your case, and if somebody can go through that with you one-on-one, that can save you going through some of the hoops or make you understand what's the best way of going through the hoops. And given I'm an IMG coming through that whole system, and I've sort of crossed all those barriers, I sort of really understand firsthand what the issues are. And there are multiple number of doctors I've helped over the last 12 months, navigate the system. And I guess having a chat with me and, understanding the system would accelerate that process, hopefully.
And then if you're looking for other sort of help, I'll just point out we've got our Advanced Med website. There's links in the description of that. We've got a whole bunch of things for IMGs. There's a free resource page there with lots of things and links and helpful things and a collection of all the videos. So that's what this one looks like. We've set it up specifically for international medical graduates. There's a link to join the Facebook book group, which has over 1,000 members in it now, where I pop in and Naj pops in and answers questions people might have about the process. I've got all the videos that I've made around this, although I think I've got to add a few more in that I've recently done. Links to recruitment companies, registration links. Here's a good part. I've linked all the employment portals, so if you're kind of wondering where to look for jobs, they're there. If you're looking for sort of more help, we also do coaching for doctors, and you can get some comprehensive coaching around the standard pathway. I also do some individual coaching as well. Also help specialists with the specialist pathway. So this is where you can book into a session with Naj. And some people might be thinking at this point, well, my CV does need a bit of an overhaul. Well, we've got you covered on that as well. A number of options on the website for that. You can access a CV builder from us. We can do a review of your CV or a course on your CV. And the thing that a lot of IMGs are now asking me for is a complete overhaul of their CV. So if you're an early career graduate, we've got a 2-page CV product there for you, or if you need something slightly bigger, then we can help you out doing that as well. So plenty of things if you're looking for additional assistance there on our website. So Naj, one final lesson we wanted to just cover for everyone, and that was we've kind of used this word a few times, but persistence.
That's the most important thing. Persistence will make things possible for you. So make sure you don't give up. Keep applying for jobs. Improve your strategy. Improve your persistence day in and day out. Keep applying, and one day you'll get that job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think persistence is the key here. Pays to be smart though, so you've gotten some tips about how you can do that and have a strategy, stick to it. But if it's not working after a while, be prepared to change a little bit. That should help you out. So it's been great talking to you today, Naj, and covering sort of the comprehensive view of where you started from and how you got here. I'm sure people might have some questions for you. What's the best way of getting in contact? Obviously, this video will be on your channel, so there's some links there. But any other ways people can get in contact with you?
Yeah, best way would be just emailing to me at outbackdraustralia@gmail.com or sending me inbox message on Facebook Messenger. I'm quite active over there. But at the same time, Anthony, thank you for the opportunity in terms of collaborating and making this video. I'm sure that this video is going to help out a few of the doctors who are coming into Australia in the next few months or years.
Yeah, and please subscribe to my channel and Naj's channel and watch some of our videos and help us out. We spend a lot of time, don't we, creating this content. A lot of it's for free for people's benefit. If you want to use some of our services, that's great. That helps us out too. But we realize a lot of people are just using this in a free way, and we're happy to do that. But you can certainly support us. You may have some questions that you can pop in the comment boxes below. We'll endeavour to answer them as well. Thanks again, Naj, and I'll see everyone in the next video.
Thank you very much. Adios.
Bye.